We walked by the blue phone booth on the way to the trail, and we thought, now that's ironic. Who would need a phone booth out here in the middle of the wilderness when you have cell phones, and you know, what's the need? And of course I did find out later there was a pretty great need. And I told Mason, I said, you know, you always have to be careful walking across anything that looks wet, because it'll be slippery, wet, wet, slippery. And sure enough, he said, yeah, I understand that. And within, 30 seconds, he's slipping off the rock into this little pool of water, and comes up about this far on his leg. We went up to the bridge, took a bunch of pictures. We were having a great time. Mason was taking the lead. He was making notes. He wanted his ranger badge. I'd walk down closer to the creek, and Mason had been in an area up a little bit higher, and I know that he really likes that. He likes the rock formations. We'd been to Sedona and a lot of other places, and we really liked that. So I'd asked Mason if he wanted to come down to the area where I was, and he frankly was a little scared. He's like, Dad, I'm a little scared of coming down there with you, and for some reason I lost my footing, and so I fell backwards into this creek, shoved down through these really super sharp rocks, about two levels of falls, 6 to 12 feet tall, I guess, and then finally got pushed out into a pool down below.
We heard a noise, and my husband went to the edge and had seen Mitch pull himself out of the water and onto the rock. I heard him scream, "Somebody needs to go for help." And so I started to run down the trail as fast as I could, knowing that we didn't have any cell service there.
And she said someone had just fallen off the cliff and into Avalanche Gorge. And we had just been there a moment before, and so we figured we'd better go back and take a look. My wife is a nurse, and I was an ER nurse at the time.
Pain really set in once I pulled myself up on this rock, and it was cold.
And I looked down and saw a fella laying up on rocks on the edge of the river.
Half in the water, half out of the water, not making any noise. In fact, when I looked over, I didn't think he was even alive at the time.
So I looked over by some shrubs and saw a blue payphone, and I think I just dialed the operator, and I told him that we needed some help in the park, that a gentleman had fallen in, and he was in a very difficult spot to get to. And she said they would send a ranger, and I just remember saying, we need more than a ranger. We're going to need an ambulance or a helicopter. He's hurt pretty bad. I ran back up to the site and told them that I had called 911 and that I was going back down to meet the ambulance at the trailhead.
It took us quite a while to get down there, and I was able to get over the top and talk to him, and found out he was alive, and but I could see he was in pretty bad shape.
I looked downstream. There was another fella coming upstream through the creek towards them.
It was a little slippery, so I took off my shoes and climbed down there, and was actually able to get right down close to Mitch.
They were throwing down clothes to try to warm me. Stuart, if I remember right, crawled out onto this rock. Scott and Shea were talking to me. They're all working together. These guys were phenomenal. Shea came up the creek, was there in the freezing cold water.
We all were suspecting hypothermia because his legs were dangling in the water, and he was, completely soaked.
They'd asked, is there anything that they can do, until the board comes to try to comfort me? And I said, well, if they could get that one leg out of the water, that would be really helpful. And they did. They ended up tying a rope to it and then tying it up to a tree.
We just stayed with him for a while, and I didn't want to move him. I knew from being an ER nurse we didn't want to move him because we didn't really know what the injuries were.
And we had gotten a call that there was a hiker in Glacier Park who had fallen into Avalanche Gorge and had suffered extremity injury.
The trees were real tall, so as we circled around we saw a gravel bar adjacent to the parking lot that looked good and flat.
And eventually the park service came, and they had a backboard. So we made a decision based upon the time of day. It was dark, he was freezing cold. The best thing to do was to get him out of there. By this time it was probably close, 45 minutes I would imagine to an hour, that we'd already been down there with him, and we were worried about hypothermia. Before we put him on the board, we just did a quick like a neuro check with him. We checked to see if he was hurting anywhere else. We checked his neck, made sure he could move all his fingers, his toes and everything, and assessed that he really didn't have any other injuries.
They were getting ready, and they're like, okay, are we ready to roll him over onto the board? And I said, well, my foot's still tied to that tree. And they're like, oh yeah, all right, we'll get that. And you know, some conversation takes place. They're like, all right, I think we're ready now. We're going to flip you over. I'm like, I think my foot's still tied to the tree, you know. So they finally removed the rope from my foot.
And okay, 1, 2, 3, rolled him onto the backboard. That was hard. Could feel his pain.
You know, I actually remember yelling out in just some of the most incredible pain I'd ever been in, and then also kind of looking down at my legs on the board, and my left leg just being all kind of cattywampus.
And then we wrapped him up. We trussed him up actually, sort of like a chicken, putting extra straps and stuff across his chest and over his shoulders. We were able to get a long rope. We threw it over a tree, and we had the people up on top pull, and as they pulled, I pushed out, and the fellow in the gorge itself guided him and just held him in position, and then we just pulled him up.
It was a pretty cool thing because everybody helped out. You know, there was lots of people standing up above. They got on the end of the rope, and everybody just kind of pulled to and drug him out.
We were able to get him up on the land, and at that time we started to wrap him up and everything. And by that time, Alert arrived on the scene.
We were able to start an IV and give him some pain medicine that seemed to help quite a bit.
Everybody joined forces, got me hiked out of the trail, met up with the ambulance that was waiting for me down there, and then the ambulance, and it seemed like such a short ride from the ambulance to the helicopter.
We're watching his vital signs, looking at the monitor, and making sure that the interventions we've taken are adequate and not contraindicated by what we're seeing in the patient.
All the time it took us to get to him, get him out of the water, get him down to the alert site where the helicopter was. They were probably from there to the hospital in less than 10 minutes.
That service, hands down, saved my life, and probably, you know, I know that they're responsible for saving a lot of lives.
When I saw Mitch, here's this young athletic guy who is just in a lot of pain, and any type of movement just caused shuddering pain, and of course with the shivering, it just was really quite uncomfortable for him. In the course of working Mitch up, we found out with various x-rays that he had a very significant fracture of his pelvis. Essentially, the whole left side of his pelvis was shattered. The ball was shoved through the socket of the pelvis into a number of pieces.
Kalispell, hands down, if not the best hospital I've ever been at. The people were so caring, so thoughtful, just a top-notch group, and I remember feeling so confident that they were going to you know, make good decisions for me.
This was such a complicated fracture that our orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Stimson, felt that he really ought to be transferred to Seattle for specialty care, that's not the type of fracture that we repair here in Kalispell. So after we stabilized Mitch, we made arrangements for him to be transferred to Harborview in Seattle, and we were able to use the services of the Alert 2 airplane and transfer him to Harborview, where he underwent internal fixation of all those bone fragments.
I remember assuring Mason that we would take really good care of his dad and get him to Seattle safely. I could tell that Mitch was a little bit anxious, so we started talking about climbing. The sun was rising, and ended up looking over, and there was a picture-perfect day of Mount Rainier. So I woke Mitch up.
And I remember pulling myself up and looking at it, and I'd shared with him that it was my intention to climb Mount Rainier. I'm just an optimistic person, so at that point I said, you know, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't be able to still climb this next year. They completely reconstructed the hip socket with plates. I'm cut, it's about from my right hip all the way to behind my left hip. So I virtually had 6 to 7 months to get my body all back into shape. Sharp, my girlfriend, said before I left, you know, should you really be doing this? Even if I don't summit, it would be okay. And the good news is, I summited.
He really is a quality individual. He's involved in a lot of community service projects and really does a lot of good in the world. And I'm just really glad that I was having the opportunity to be involved in his care and to help him continue doing what he does, which he loves to do. He's a great guy.
I'm enamored with how perfect strangers can come together and do such a miraculous thing, and for somebody they don't even know. It was, you know, it gives me goosebumps. It's just great people. I love the people in Montana, and I love what they did for me.